In the twilight of Middle-earth's Third Age, few figures loom as large as Helm Hammerhand, the ninth king of Rohan. Taking the throne during dangerous times, Helm's 20-year rule from the year 2741 to year 2759 of the Third Age faced tremendous challenges, unlike any since Rohan's founding. Born in the year 2691 to the royal family, Helm gained not just a crown, but inherited a kingdom caught in ongoing conflict with the western Dunlendings. Named for a strength so great that his bare hands could kill, he transformed from a mortal ruler to a mythic destroyer in Rohan's darkest time. When Dunlending invaders seized his halls and slaughtered his son, Helm unleashed a wrath so terrible that it transcended death itself. What drove this king to become a phantom of vengeance who haunted his own realm? How did a ruler become so feared that enemies would tremble at the sound of his horn for generations to come? The answers lie not merely in historical accounts, but in the blood-soaked snows of the long winter, where a desperate king's fury carved his name into legend and proved that some men become most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. In the year 2510 of the Third Age, amid the looming shadows of Gondor's decline, Eorl the Young led his people south from the Vales of Anduin to aid Sirion, steward of Gondor, at the Battle of the Field of Celebrant. This crucial intervention rescued Gondor from near-certain defeat by the Balcoth and Orcs, reshaping the power dynamics of Western Middle-earth. The alliance, known as the Oath of Eorl, forged a lasting bond between the two realms. However, it also planted the seeds of a bitter conflict that would erupt violently during Helm Hammerhand's reign. Sirion's gift of the northern province of Calenardhon to Eorl's people marked an extraordinary transfer of power. The vast plains, hills, and mountain valleys were transformed from a sparsely populated Gondorian frontier and became the foundation of the Kingdom of Rohan. While strategic wisdom guided this decision, Gondor lacked the population to defend these northern territories adequately. It inadvertently dispossessed the scattered communities of Dunlendings who had dwelled in those lands for generations. By the time Helm ascended to the throne in the year 2741 of the Third Age, some 231 years after its founding, Rohan had evolved into a well-established kingdom with robust military traditions, a unique cultural identity, and a clear royal lineage through the first line of kings. The Rohirrim, renowned for their horse-riding skills and battle prowess, turned the plains of Rohan into a respected force across Middle-earth. Yet this success came at a cost: the displacement and resentment of the land's original inhabitants, the Dunlendings. The conflict with the Dunlendings predated Helm's reign by generations. During his grandfather Dior's rule, the Dunlendings occupied Isengard at the southern end of the Misty Mountains, controlling the fortress but not the impregnable Orthanc Tower at its center. This strategic incursion created a dangerous salient at Rohan's western border, threatening communication and trade along the Gap of Rohan. Despite repeated campaigns, neither Deor nor Helm's father Gram succeeded in dislodging the Dunlendings from Isengard. Fragmentary battle accounts from this period describe increasingly bitter encounters, with quarter rarely given by either side. The conflict had evolved from territorial dispute into existential struggle, with cultural animosity overlaying political grievances. By Helm's ascension at age 50, this festering wound at Rohan's border had created a situation where even minor provocations could trigger catastrophic escalation. For the Dunlendings, this was more than just a territorial dispute. They traced their lineage to the men of the White Mountains, who had lived in the region since the First Age. From their perspective, Rohan's people were foreign invaders, granted their ancestral lands by Gondor, a kingdom the Dunlendings saw as having no right to do so. This deep-rooted grievance fueled their resistance against Rohan. Dunlendings raided settlements, defied royal authority, and allied with enemies of both Rohan and Gondor. Their cultural differences added to the tension. The Dunlendings held onto their distinct language, beliefs, and traditions, while mocking the Rohirrim as strawheads for their fair hair. The pivotal moment in Helm's reign came in the year 2754 of the Third Age, when Freca, a wealthy lord with lands on both sides of the Adorn River, arrived at Edoras with an imposing retinue. Contemporary accounts describe Freca as a man of mixed heritage, claiming descent from both the Dunlendings and the fifth king of Rohan, thus positioning himself as a potential rival to Helm's authority. Freca's challenge to royal authority had been building for some time. He had established a stronghold near the Gap of Rohan and had consistently ignored Helm's summons to council, demonstrating a calculated defiance of the king's authority. When he finally appeared at Edoras, it was with sufficient force to demonstrate his power and a bold demand: the marriage of his son Wulf to Helm's daughter. Such a union would have given Freca's line a potential claim to the throne while strengthening ties between the Rohirrim and the Dunlendings. In Appendix A of The Return of the King, Tolkien records remarkable detail about Helm's confrontation with Freca. This clash goes beyond a simple power struggle. It reflects the deep-seated cultural tensions in Rohan since its founding. Freca, with his mixed heritage, became a symbol of the unresolved conflict between the Rohirrim and the Dunlendings over legitimate authority. By demanding a royal marriage, Freca aimed for more than personal gain. He sought a shift in power that would legitimize Dunlending claims to the land. Helm's council, recognizing the broader implications of this demand, urged caution. Contemporary chronicles record that several advisors recommended diplomatic concessions to avoid open conflict with a powerful border lord. But Helm, perhaps seeing the existential threat Freca's ambitions posed to Rohirric sovereignty, chose direct confrontation instead. After a verbal exchange in which Helm said to Freca that the king does not permit insolence in his hall, and remarked that Freca had grown too fat to walk alone, the king forced Freca to accompany him out from Edoras into an open field. There, in full view of witnesses, Helm struck Freca with his bare fist with such tremendous force that Freca died soon afterward. The public execution of Freca was highly symbolic. By acting openly instead of in secret, Helm turned what could have been seen as a political assassination into a display of royal authority. The single, fatal blow was more than an act of violence. It was a public ritual underscoring the king's role as the ultimate judge and enforcer of justice in his realm. This demonstration of physical might earned Helm the epithet Hammerhand, a name that would follow him through history and into legend. More importantly, it established a clear boundary against the aspirations of those who would challenge the authority of Rohan's royal line. Helm's declaration that Freca's followers were enemies of Rohan transformed what might have been a personal conflict into a matter of state, setting the stage for the greater conflict to come. The killing of Freca, while resolving the immediate challenge to Helm's authority, ignited long simmering tensions between Rohan and the Dunlendings. 4 years later, in the year 2758 of the Third Age, Wulf, the son of Freca, returned with an overwhelming force to avenge his father and claim what he considered his rightful place. The timing of Wulf's invasion demonstrated keen strategic understanding and careful preparation. Rather than striking immediately after his father's death, when Rohan would have been prepared and vigilant, Wulf waited until circumstances aligned in his favor. Their attack coincided with Gondor's preoccupation with corsair raids from Umbar, ensuring Rohan's traditional ally would be unable to render assistance. Helm initially responded as a traditional Rohirric king would, by assembling his cavalry and riding to meet the threat at the crossings of Isen, the traditional western boundary of his realm. But the Dunlending host that Wulf had assembled proved too numerous and too determined. In a rare defeat for Rohirrim cavalry, who prided themselves on their superiority in open battle, Helm's forces were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Forced into a fighting retreat, Helm withdrew his remaining forces toward the mountain fortress of Sothburg. During this withdrawal came the first of many personal tragedies that would fuel Helm's transformation. His eldest son, Haleth, commanding the rearguard, died fighting at the very doors of the stronghold, buying time for his father and the remaining defenders to reach safety. The situation deteriorated rapidly across Rohan. While Helm and his forces were engaged at the Eisen, a second contingent of Dunlendings had circled south and struck directly at Edoras. With the capital's defences weakened by Helm's western deployment, the city fell within days. Wulf captured the Golden Hall of Meduseld and placed himself upon Eorl's throne, claiming both the crown of Rohan and Helm's daughter as prizes of conquest. With Helm and his remaining son Hammer besieged in Suthburg, and only his nephew Frealaf escaping to the hidden refuge of Dunharrow with a small band of loyal followers, Rohan stood on the brink of extinction. Then nature intervened with catastrophic timing. In November of the year 2758, the skies darkened, and the first snows of what would come to be called the Long Winter began to fall. This event, lasting from November until March of the following year, transformed an already dire military situation into humanitarian catastrophe as food dwindled on both sides. As the siege dragged on and supplies dwindled to critical levels, Helm's surviving son, Hammer, defied his father's strict orders and led a daring sortie of 30 riders. Their goal was to break through the encircling Dunlending lines and retrieve provisions stored in hidden caches throughout the Westfold. But the long winter showed no mercy. A fierce blizzard engulfed them, and they lost their way in the swirling whiteout. Their desperate gamble ended in heartbreak. The party was never seen alive again. When the snows began to thaw in the spring, searchers found their frozen bodies still astride their mounts, a haunting testament to the relentless fury of the winter and the desperate courage of Rohan's defenders. The psychological impact of this loss transformed Helm. Having already lost one son in battle and now bereft of his heir, watching his people starve while a usurper sat upon his throne, Helm underwent a metamorphosis from king to avenger. As Tolkien writes, Helm grew fierce and gaunt for famine and grief, and the dread of him alone was worth many men in the defense of the burg. What followed became one of the most enduring tales in Rohirric folklore, a testament to how personal grief can transform into terrifying wrath. Refusing to be trapped while his people starved, Helm began a campaign of solitary terror against the besieging forces. Clad entirely in white to blend with the snow, he would leave Suthburg alone under cover of darkness, first sounding his great horn before stalking into enemy encampments to kill with his bare hands. This ritualistic approach of announcing his presence before bringing death reveals a calculated strategy that was more than just survival or military necessity. Helm's actions suggest a ruler transformed by grief into an instrument of vengeance, determined not merely to defeat his enemies, but to haunt them. The psychological warfare element proved devastating. By announcing his presence with the horn before each sortie, Helm created a connection in the minds of the Dunlendings between the sound and imminent death. Enemies would flee rather than face him, despite his being alone. This strategic use of fear multiplied his effectiveness far beyond what a single warrior could typically achieve, effectively making his wrath a weapon that could break enemy morale without requiring large forces. His legend grew through rumors spreading among Dunlending forces that the starving king, finding no food, would devour the men he slew. While undoubtedly fictional, such tales illustrate how Helm transformed in his enemy's perception from weary king into a monstrous force of vengeance, more wraith than man. The Dunlendings, who already possessed cultural beliefs about vengeful spirits, were particularly susceptible to these supernatural interpretations of Helm's raids. The blurring of boundaries between the living king and supernatural entity began even before his death, suggesting that Helm's wrath had already elevated him from historical figure to mythic presence. The culmination of Helm's resistance came in the final days of the long winter. According to meticulously maintained chronicles of the fortress defenders, one night in early 2759 of the Third Age, his horn sounded as it had many times before, but the king never returned to the fortress. The following morning, as the first rays of sun broke through after many days of darkness, sentries spotted a white figure standing motionless on the dike before the gates of Suthburg. There stood Helm, dead as a stone, but his knees were unbent. This powerful image of a king who stood unyielding even in death immediately became a symbol of resilience in Rohirric cultural memory. Helm's death, standing tall and defiant, reflected the unwavering spirit that defined his final months. Historical accounts note that the Dunlendings, gripped by fear, dared not approach his lifeless body, showcasing the psychological impact Helm had on his enemies, who continued to fear him even after death. Helm's passing elevated him from a historical figure to a mythic icon. Unlike other kings who fell in battle against human foes, Helm succumbed to the merciless winter, the same force that had claimed his sons. This made his story transcend ordinary heroism, transforming him into a symbol of defiance against all forms of adversity, whether from nature or man. The mythologization of Helm deepened through accounts that emerged in the weeks and months following his death. Soldiers stationed at the fortress during spring patrols reported hearing the distinctive sound of Helm's horn echoing through the deep, always at night, always during moments of danger. From Tolkien's records, we learn that the Wraith of Helm would walk among the foes of Rohan and kill men with fear. Not merely poetic imagery, but a reflection of widely reported experiences among both Rohirrim and their enemies. The breaking of the long winter in March of the year 2759 of the Third Age marked the beginning of Rohan's resurgence. With improving weather conditions providing strategic opportunity, Helm's nephew Frealaf seized the initiative. Having maintained a small force of loyal riders at the hidden refuge of Dunharrow throughout the winter, he launched a targeted assault on Edoras itself. Frealaf's surprise attack on Meduseld caught the enemy off guard. He confronted and killed Wulf, the usurper who had seized Helm's throne and daughter. By striking at the leader instead of launching a larger campaign, Frealaf displayed clever tactics rooted in Rohan's warrior traditions. Frealaf's coronation as the 10th king of Rohan marked an important transition: the establishment of the second line of kings, which would endure until the death of Theoden some 260 years later. This dynastic shift, necessitated by Helm's death without heirs, nevertheless maintained continuity through the maternal line, as Frealaf was Helm's sister son. The funeral ceremonies for Helm further cemented his legendary status. His body, recovered from the Hornburg, was interred in the 9th mound outside Edoras. Accounts note that white Cymbalmine flowers grew particularly thick upon his grave, creating the appearance of a snowy blanket, a fitting resonance of the white-clad warrior who had haunted his enemies during the long winter. By late 2759 of the Third Age, Frealaf had successfully driven the remaining Dunlendings from Rohan's territories, including the strategically vital fortress of Isengard. It was during this period of consolidation that Saruman the White secured permission from both King Frealaf and Beren, steward of Gondor, to take up residence in the Tower of Orthanc within Isengard. This arrangement appeared at the time to represent a diplomatic victory, securing a powerful ally on Rohan's vulnerable western border. However, Tolkien's records reveal that over subsequent centuries, Saruman would secretly cultivate relationships with those hostile to both Gondor and Rohan. The irony that the fortress where Helm had made his legendary stand would later become a staging ground for threats orchestrated by the wizard welcomed in the aftermath of Helm's death underscores the complex legacy of this period. Perhaps the most tangible aspect of Helm Hammerhand's legacy is the renaming of the gorge and fortress where he made his final stand. What had previously been known as Sothberg became the Hornburg, while the gorge itself gained the name by which it would be known to future generations, Helm's Deep. The renaming of these locations effectively inscribed his narrative into the very landscape of Rohan, ensuring that future generations would continue to associate these strategic positions with the king whose wrath defended them against overwhelming odds. This transformation of physical space into memorial demonstrates how thoroughly Helm's story had penetrated the cultural consciousness of Rohan. The strategic importance of Helm's Deep would be reaffirmed centuries later during the War of the Ring, when once again Rohan faced an existential threat from the west. The decision of King Theoden to make his stand at the Hornburg echoed Helm's earlier defense, with the fortress proving just as crucial to the survival of the realm as it had in the Third Age. This historical resonance was not lost on either the defenders or their enemies. Saruman's forces targeted the statue of Helm for destruction early in their assault, recognizing its symbolic importance to Rohirric morale. This deliberate act of cultural desecration reveals how powerfully Helm's image continued to inspire resistance even centuries after his death. Indeed, during that later conflict, some claim to have heard the horn of Helm Hammerhand blowing again in the deep, suggesting that the wrath which had sustained Rohan through its darkest hour continued to echo through the ages. Chronicles from the War of the Ring describe how, in the darkest moment of the battle, when the deeping wall had been breached and all seemed lost, the sound of a horn deeper and more primal than any carried by living men echoed through the ravine, giving new courage to the defenders and striking fear into the hearts of the attackers. This cyclic recurrence of Helm's presence at moments of national peril demonstrates how thoroughly his wrath had been transformed from personal emotion into cultural touchstone, a symbol of Rohan's resilience and determination to endure regardless of circumstance. In the cultural memory of Rohan, Helm became not just a historical king, but an ever-present guardian whose wrath remained available to be called upon in times of greatest need, a weaponized legend that continued to shape events long after the man himself had passed into history.